Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 3, Episode 2, The Cloak of Duplication. In this episode, Nandor needs some help with his love life. This was something that I was vaguely curious about because we just really haven't seen much from him in that regard. And it turns out he is so much worse at all of this than I was expecting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. So, all right, we're going to start off. I'm going to say that there are a couple key things that I want to zero in on this episode. The number one thing that I am interested in talking about is mostly the vampiric council, power struggle that's going on between Nandor and Nadja. But, of course, we will have to talk about Nandor's love life and what is going on there as well. I am so fascinated by the fact that Nandor even wants to be in charge. It's the kind of thing, and I have said this before, Nandor's personality that we have seen, as compared to what we have heard about who he was in the past, that shit does not match up. There is no similarity in the Nandor that we see now to the raping, pillaging madman that he used to be 1,000 years ago. And the only thing that I can say is that makes it at all believable that he could have ever been that way is the utter disregard that he has for human life to this day, and how completely fine he is with just murdering people, and that is really it. Otherwise, I have looked at him and just been like, how was that you? And what happened to you over the years to make you lose that completely ruthless, bloodthirsty streak? Because it's clearly not there anymore. He is just so much more retiring. And this episode kind of brings up something here where he's just really wanting more out of his afterlife. And we find out that there's a little bit of envy going on for him with Nandor, or with Nadja and Laszlo being together. It's not that he's into either of them. It's just that he personally has a feeling of loneliness, I think. And that's probably a big part of why he has decided to hold on to Guillermo, despite there being this obvious power difference and the relationship being so toxic between the two of them. Sometimes if you don't really have anything else going on, anything feels better than nothing, Martin says, I think part of it is, if I recall correctly, he's the oldest of the vampire roommates, and so he's gone the looniest with age. Yeah, that is something that I'm a little bit unclear on how much we're supposed to assume age changes. The way that we normally see this depicted in a lot of fiction where there are people who can live for a long time is there is eventually a sort of boredom that comes up where you have tried everything. You have done it all. You have met all kinds of people, and you get to a point where you're sort of well, now what? And I'm not really getting that energy from him or any of the other vampires. Laszlo, for sure, is just very excited by continuing to be alive because he just wants to fuck forever. And that's pretty much all he ever is going to need again. Nadja, I am like the most convinced of, as she feels the most motivated to me to shake things up in a way that would be like a lot more substantial, because I think there's a part of her, you know, the way that her ghost doll talks to her about like, what are you even doing here? You live with these two losers. What have you done with your life? I think that is a bit of a peek into her deepest thoughts about things, which explains some of what happens this episode. Nandor, it's like the time having gone by seems to have isolated him more somehow, which I can imagine would happen. So what we have here is the whole crew gets brought to this sort of central archive of items and a library that are for Vampiric Council members only. And there are a lot of really wild artifacts here, and we will talk about those. But the first one that, you know, the main thing is the Cloak of Duplication, which you can use to turn into anyone. And when you turn into them, your voice does not change. It's just how you look. So we get this idea that percolates for Nandor here of him asking someone, and he decides to pick Laszlo, to turn into him and go and woo the girl at the gym named Meg that he has had his eye on for some time. And when he starts talking about the gym, I loved this so much. So it was a 24-hour gym, so he would go really late at night, obviously, and there was very few people there. And as he's talking about going, he's describing the ways in which he and the other young men, when he, like way back in the day when he was human, used to physically compete with one another and like admire each other's bodies and show off, essentially, in a way that is simply not done anymore. And he feels like a little sad over that. And this is another aspect to me of his loneliness. You know, it just feels like a lot of the things that he is instinctively doing to try and reach out are causing him to be more distant from everyone because of the complete weirdness of them in the modern era. And honestly, I do really enjoy the idea of like dudes just completely fawning over one another's like physicality in a way that is like platonic, but still really physical, because that is just something that we will often see women depicted as doing, that just being like, oh my God, you were so pretty. And, you know, saying all kinds of complimentary things or envying certain things about other women's bodies, but they are not actually sexually interested in each other. And we have very few examples of men expressing that kind of envy without there being like a gay undercurrent to it or like a joke that's, you know, sort of mixed in there somewhere. And I think we should bring this back for dudes, because dudes definitely must envy each other. That's just a fucking emotion that happens. And the concept of just being like, oh my God, man, your pecs are fucking, that is what I'm after. How? Tell me what to do. Like, why not? Yes, let's do this. I want more of it. But he doesn't understand what's happening in the modern age. So he is up in this dude's grill as that guy is doing bench presses and he's doing bicep curls in a way that is so inappropriate and makes that guy clearly very uncomfortable. I do love too that he has no reflection as he's doing these like overhead presses, and he does not seem to give any shits about whether anyone notices that he doesn't have a reflection. It's just completely not of concern to him. And I'm extremely curious about if we're ever going to get to see anybody reacting to things like this a little bit more, you know? But anyway, so there's a girl that works at the front desk and her name is Meg. And I thought that we were going to have like anything to indicate that the two of them had some chemistry to begin with. Because Nandor says she's not my girlfriend yet. And I'm thinking that a dude of his years should know how this goes. And oh boy, did I overestimate this dude. So they've like made very awkward, uncomfortable conversation one time, it seems like. And it was not great. And this is the thing that I want to know. Why did she appeal to him? And I'm not saying that like she's unattractive, but it's the kind of thing like it's feels so childish. And this is what I'm kind of getting off of him in general. A childish quality about what he thinks it's like to have a relationship with somebody. He feels like a fifth grader where he just sees a girl, he thinks she's pretty, and is like, will you be my girlfriend? And there is no sense of having anything in common being actually important to him. And my other question is, would you be trying to turn her, or do you want to date her while she's human? You know, like I genuinely don't know what Nandor's like stance would be on that. I feel like if he wants to share his life with somebody in the same way that Nadja and Laszlo are, he would want to turn them eventually. But, you know, then there's also the appeal of having a lover that you can feed off of if you don't kill them. And that's certainly like such a thing in so much fiction. So is that what he's looking for? Is somebody that's like a simultaneous partner, but also a food source? I don't know what he would be after. And so this idea that he has is he wants to use Laszlo, have him turn into himself, and go woo her because Laszlo is such a ladies' man. And this is one of those things that I find so funny because, like, we know Laszlo has indeed fucked a lot. Like, a lot. So I am not trying to say that Laszlo isn't a ladies' man. But there is a difference between a man who has fucked a lot and a man who is good at wooing women. Wooing and getting a woman to the point where she is ready to fuck are not the same thing. And I am unsurprised that Nandor wouldn't see that distinction, you know? That makes sense to me that he wouldn't really understand what the difference is between those kinds of personalities and what appeals to women. And so he asks first Laszlo to go. But Laszlo just fucking immediately hands the cloak over to Colin and says that Nandor wants you to go and do this. He actually asked me to do it, but I can't be fucked, is the way he says this. So you do it. And Colin, in true Colin fashion. Oh God, you guys, this is so unbelievably like painful to watch. Colin turns into Nandor, and he decides to use a method of wooing that you may have heard of called negging. Negging, for those who are blissfully unaware of the absolute garbage that is circulating in the dating pool right now, is a theory that bad men have about how to approach women, and especially how to approach women that these men probably consider slightly out of their own league. And what they do is they come at these women with a comment that is negative and sort of a put down in order to get women who are insecure and looking for approval to engage despite themselves, because they now want to prove something. And the theory is that if you come across a woman who is insecure in this way, that she will look to you for approval and continually in the relationship, because she is insecure, put up with more bullshit because she doesn't have good boundaries and know where to draw the line. It's, when you get down to it, incredibly predatory. The whole theory behind it is find women who do not see their own value and make sure they never see it, because then they will leave you, and you have to ensure that they never believe anybody else would ever want them. And that's really like the crux of it, at the heart of all of this. It's really, really sad. And it's really gross because the concept is tied in with other comments that men are supposed to make if they want to use this theory about how she could use a little, like she could lose a little weight, or maybe she should do something different with her hair. A lot of stuff about appearance and like controlling her appearance after, if this works, which I will say, I have never seen this work. I'm not saying it doesn't work ever. I am just saying that I have never, as far as I know, been on the receiving end of this, because negging really became popular like after I was married to Brendan. So I wasn't in the dating pool when this was like a thing. And women that I became friends with once it was a thing would never have put up with it. It would just not have worked on the people that I am personally involved with. That is just, you know, the circle I run in, though. And I am sure that this has worked occasionally, because being insecure is a real, like, that is the thing that predators look for. And there are certain things about that sort of give away how you see yourself. And I tend to be friends with people who are pretty self-confident, to like from one degree to another. And it makes sense to me that nobody has really approached anyone I know with this particular attitude, you know? So anyway, Colin goes in there, greets her with, "Hey, dipshit," and then asks if there was a hot girl, Meg, working here. And when she says she's Meg, follows up with, "You used to be hotter." And then he does this thing that I have been on the receiving end of before, mostly in like shitty comment sections, where he tells her about her own life, but he doesn't know anything about her. So what he's doing is like making a very general summary that, because it's so vague, might apply. Your life didn't go the way you planned. You're a fading beauty working this like dead-end job, and you've been promised the world by men who served all of their promises up on the end of a 4-inch penis. And I'm going to do you a favor and give you the chance to walk out of here with me. I have 100% been on the receiving end of this. I have had so many people like invent entire stories about my life and the way that, like, just everything about this is him putting a concept on her in order to make her go, "Oh my God, am I wasting my life? Things didn't go the way I planned, and I am getting older." Like that's his goal here, right? It's awful. It's so pitiful to watch. And this Meg, bless her, tells him to hold on while she goes and gets her stuff. And by stuff, she means security, who comes and rightfully ejects him from the premises. Colin doesn't have mind wipe powers, just to remind y'all. So when later Laszlo comes in wearing this cape, she remembers the last encounter that she had, and he explains it away by saying that he was on Klonopin. The whole thing with Laszlo being in Nandor's body here, I have a real sincere question, and I don't know how, and many of you like remember specifically, but if you rewatch the scene where it's Laszlo and he's wooing Meg, the voice is not Matt Berry's voice. And I don't know if it's supposed to be like Matt Berry is attempting an American accent and he's just doing it really badly. It felt really strange because I don't think it is him attempting an American accent, but it certainly doesn't sound like him either. And everybody else, it sounded very much like the actor. And I don't understand why Matt Berry was an exception and why he's the only one where it sounds like somebody doing a Matt Berry impression and not that well. And I don't really get what was supposed to be happening here. And I found it really distracting through the whole scene. Like, and the idea that he would attempt to do an American accent anyway, when that isn't Nandor's accent, and it doesn't sound like he's trying to imitate Nandor. So what the hell? I watched this episode twice, and both times I had to stop it and just be like, I am not imagining this, right? That isn't him. Martin says Kevin Novak was doing all of the voices. He's doing impressions of each person for when Laszlo, Colin, and Guillermo are acting with Nandor's form. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that when Nadja's in his body, that's him imitating Nadja? And they didn't just record the actress and play it over him lip syncing? Is that what you're telling me, Martin? That every single person who occupied his body, he imitated all of them, and none of that was pre-recorded like with a lip sync? Because if that's the case, that's insane. It full on sounded like Colin and Guillermo. I mean, completely sounded like them. So if that was just him doing impressions, I am very, very impressed. And I guess not being able to like nail the way that, because Matt Berry has a really distinctive voice. He's oddly easy to imitate depending, but I can understand not really getting it. Martin says, I'm not sure about Nadja, but certain about Colin and the others. Novak is actually an impressionist and voice actor in England. Wow. Martin follows up with Matt Berry sounds like a text-to-speech device. Yeah, he has some weird intonations. There is somebody on, I think, TikTok who does impressions of him, and he will monologue famous scenes and do it in Matt Berry's voice. And he does like one of Gandalf's speeches somewhere in Matt Berry's voice, and that shit is amazing. I can't remember what his name is. But anyway, okay, so that explains why he sounded so weird. I can't believe that he was just imitating the others. Like, Guillermo sounded a little off here and there, but I was willing to put that down to just the voice actor, you know, when he's just like speaking, that maybe it's going to come out a little different than it would if he had his physicality going in the scene as well. Wow. All right. That is quite wild. I am going to mention that to Owen because I was asking Owen why his voice sounded so different when he was Matt Berry, and Owen never even suggested this was a possibility. So I don't think it entered his mind either. And I think this is going to be very surprising for him. But thank you, Martin. I did not know any of that. So I really do appreciate it. So yeah, the whole way that like Laszlo approaches it is to compliment her on her high, firm ass, apologize for being on drugs, try to sing to her a song that does not work and isn't really anything, and then show her some of the old-timey pornography that he has brought with him, which she once again responds to with finding security and having him kicked out. But before he leaves, he wipes her memory. And I have to assume he's wiping her memory also of Colin, but maybe not. It might be that he's just, you know, after this encounter. So then later, Laszlo tells Guillermo, because Guillermo manages to escape from this room, which I'll talk about in a moment, and finds himself in the library, in the like sort of archive room with all of these artifacts, and wants to try on this cloak. And Laszlo is like, yeah, go ahead. Who fucking cares? And by the way, if you want to do Nandor a favor, you can go down to his gym and woo this girl, Meg. So Guillermo goes down there. And at first, because he's just like a fucking normie, it seems to go pretty well. He is just talking about, he's just acting regular so that she agrees to go out and have a coffee with him, and things seem like they're working out. But then when he's taking Nandor's like point of view and talking about certain things that involve himself, his sort of resentment about how he's treated begins to leak out a little bit. And he speaks a little too openly about the way he feels in some ways, but because of like the way how it's weird because of his point of view versus Meg's point of view versus what Nandor would be saying, he doesn't really hear how it sounds. And Meg is interpreting everything he's saying through the lens of Guillermo talking about a guy that he has a crush on at work, that he is too afraid to like really approach and be honest with about how he feels. And I've got to be honest with you guys. I don't know why it never entered my mind that Guillermo has romantic feelings for Nandor, but it fucking never even occurred to me. And I'm really not sure why it didn't. I think Guillermo has just been so restrained in just the whole way he carries himself and the way he refers to things. He feels very like sexless in a way. And I don't mean like non-binary. I mean like he feels like maybe asexual, somebody who just straight up does not really have any interest. And I had said something about this as well when like he goes to the mixer for all of the familiars and there's a girl hitting on him and he's just like not interested. And I was sort of wondering about that, you know, like he may not even be straight. I've had an assumption that he is. I don't even know where I got that. And the whole thing with like with him and Nandor and this like longing to be turned, it could easily be that it's like a metaphor, you know, for longing after somebody who you like are not. Basically the concept of like a gay guy longing after a straight guy, but in a much more dramatic sense, you know, of it just like not being an option unless he chooses to make me part of whatever community he's in. And that's like a huge commitment. And I should have like because there is so much homoeroticism in vampire fiction. It's just such a big thing. And the most obvious like example I can give is Interview with the Vampire, which I hear they're doing like an Amazon series, I think it is now, which I've heard is really, really good, but I have not looked into that at all. I'm kind of interested in like maybe covering it, but I haven't read the source material, so I don't have a lot of like backstory knowledge to kind of fill in blanks or make it interesting. But maybe that would be what was interesting. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, the idea that there is like something much more like specific about his feelings towards Nandor than just desperately want to be like you, desperately want to have your approval and be chosen, for it to be something that is romantic. I can't believe I never thought of this, and I feel like a real fucking dodo. And based on the way he reacts, because like Meg suggests that he like approach Guillermo and tell him how he feels, and he realizes like what it is that she means, and basically immediately gets up and leaves. And I thought that the way he reacted seemed like she had touched a nerve, not like he was just like upset because she misunderstood him. You don't flee like that unless somebody has strayed a little closer than you wish they had to something that's true that you just don't want to talk about, you know? So I'm interpreting that as like something. And throughout all of this, by the way, every time somebody has failed to like hook up with Meg, they claim that she isn't into guys. Colin said this, Laszlo said this. Guillermo obviously wasn't supposed to have been on this mission at all, so he doesn't say anything about it. But Nandor eventually goes back to see her, and we find out that this was true, which I kind of love this twist, because a really common thing that men will do if they are rejected by a woman is to either A, say, well, you're fat and ugly and no man would want you anyway, or be like, well, you're probably not even into men. You're probably gay. So whatever. And the idea that they were trying to tell themselves, well, she's just not into guys. But then it turns out that's true. I kind of enjoyed that, to be honest. And Nandor is like so crestfallen at realizing. The thing that I couldn't help but laugh at was when he comes in and tries to like talk to her about it. He starts off by saying, I had such a nice time and you really made me laugh with the things that we talked about. And I was like, man, you better hope that they didn't talk about like some deep shit that was, you know, like, because otherwise that's not going to sound great, sir. But either way, yeah, she very quickly disabuses him of the notion. And again, security arrives, and this time Nandor just chucks the man into the wall, which honestly was weirdly satisfying, despite the fact that the security guy has been on the side of right and justice this entire time. He is defending a woman who is being harassed by creepos. So I should like and care about the security guy more. But there was something about the way he just makes a security guard shaped imprint on the wall that I found kind of satisfying. I don't know. It was just a thing. And I'm really wondering if this is going to like be a thing again with Nandor, if we're going to see another girl that he might be interested in. I mean, another person, because we know that he is, I don't know if you would say bisexual or pansexual or what. I think for all of the vampires, they all seem generally pansexual, because it's like there's multi-species interest as well, beyond just even like two genders. So yeah, I'm going to say pansexual for all of them, because they are into all kinds of different creatures, it seems like. So okay, let's back up now. We are going to talk about the power struggle between Nandor and Nadja. And this is like one of those where at first I really wasn't sure who I was going to be rooting for this, because it turns out like they did not allow either of them to specifically sit on that throne. They are going to be handling this like position jointly for a while. And each of them is planning to eventually usurp and take complete first place and make the other their second in command, which leads to an awful scene of bad jokes with Nandor saying stuff about number 2. And I am not going to get into that because it was just very bad. So when we start off, I want to root for Nadja here. I do, in a way that's like just female solidarity. I enjoy her as a character. She seems to have the most common sense out of anybody in the household other than Guillermo. I'm like, okay, maybe I want Nadja for this job. But as things go forward, and she is like not only kind of unhinged about the way she wants to handle things, but apparently proud of being unhinged, there was just something that made me kind of get worried about it. And I started to waver on my support of her specifically. The first job that they have is to go and collect the membership dues that a particular like nest of vampires has not paid up. They're due on the first full moon of every month, and these guys have not paid. And when we get introduced to them, you really do get the impression these are new vampires. Like, they don't know the way things are done. I don't think they fully understand what's on the line here at all. And there's a just real sense of like, well, we figured we could just do things the way that we want because. And Nandor is approaching this in... I'm going to be honest here. Nandor is approaching this the way that I would likely approach it. Which is to say, he is being too conciliatory. He is trying too hard to make this a negotiation with peers, rather than treating it as, I am the one in charge and you will do what the fuck I say. And even at one point when they mention like the ritualistic dancing, he says like, oh, well, we are going to be cutting back on that, to which Nadja screams, the fuck we are, which I don't know why, but her standing up for that, for the ritualistic dancing, and not even being willing to cut back on that in any way, there was a part of me that just really applauded that. It's a meaningless thing that I don't think actually really matters, but it's a tradition. And how quickly Nandor immediately is like, well, we are going to be like doing away with that. First of all, Nandor, you weren't planning on it. So you're just saying a thing right here in order to get them to do something for you. And you're going to immediately go back on that later because you're going to be pressured by other people who don't want you to change it, which just makes you seem weak. And second of all, it took almost nothing for you to offer to make this major change in a long-held tradition, from what I understand, from a fucking nobody. That doesn't look good. So as this continues, despite Nadja being like so much more aggressive initially than I would have been, I really started to be like, I don't know, man. I kind of think approaching it her way is the way to go. Not just because it would get results, but there's also for me a sense of, you guys were made vampiric council because you killed all the other vampires. You were chosen for your viciousness and how like you took people out who were trying to forestall you or hurt you. That has been cited as the reason you were promoted. And if that's the case, handling it the way Nadja is, that seems like what they're after and what they would want. So this like little group here is trying to act like they're just not going to honor the what's the word I want? Authority of the Vampiric Council. One of them says, and I have to admit, sort of rightfully, it just doesn't seem like either of you is really qualified to be running anything. And I was like, I hate this, but like, he's not wrong. And then finally, it's all cut off in the end, very literally, by Nadja ripping the heart out of the kid who is trying to be, he's basically the leader of the opposing group. And I really did enjoy the way this goes, because it is so sudden. And I'm just going to read the way this works. She's sort of standing off to the side with Nandor and telling him he is being openly defiant. He has to go. This guy chimes in with, "You know I can hear you, right? Vampire hearing." And she, admirably in my opinion, says, "Yeah, I'm okay with that." Because why wouldn't she be? They should know that this is what's on the line for them. Nandor tells her, "We are clearly outnumbered here." And I was like, I guess that is true. And he says, "I suggest we retreat, regroup, and re-strategize." So he then comes back over and says, "It has been wonderful to meet you, Wes. You have given us so much to..." And then Nadja just immediately jumps forward, rips his heart out of his chest, and stands there in front of everybody, holding it up until they all kneel and agree to pay their fucking dues. And I love when she's like watching them slowly kneel and just goes, "Oh, look at that." And then tells them when they're due and says, "Any questions? Didn't think so." And tosses that shit on the ground like it's nothing and walks out of the room. And Nandor is like, he gives the camera a look of chagrin, in my opinion, but he doesn't ever really seem to like address how effective she was in comparison to what he was planning to do. Like, there's a scene between him and Nadja later on, but it's I'm just gonna read this. He leaves the gym, and then we have him in his coffin, and Nadja comes in and opens it. He has already gone to bed, and she interrupts him. And she says, "What happened in Queens tonight can never, ever happen again. What is wrong with you? Has living in America made you into a big, wet pussy?" And he says, "I think I've been going through some things later. Do you ever imagine there's more to this life than mindless killing and bloodlust?" And she says, "Yeah." And when he's like, "Really?" She says, "Of course not." And he claims that that's because she has Laszlo to share her life with, which I'm not really sure how that's relevant to like the bloodlust part exactly. But I really feel the effectiveness of Nadja's method here, it to me, indicates she should be in charge. He's not up for it, and that's okay. That's fine. He doesn't seem to want to be in charge. It's like he wants to in a hypothetical, ego-driven way, in that he doesn't want to be taking orders from anyone else. But in terms of what it takes to do the job, I don't feel like he has any real interest in that part. So just don't do it. Just don't. It's fine, man. You don't have to be in charge. You're not built for it right now. Maybe one day you'll get your bloodthirstiness back and you will be all about it. But it seems to me that to do this job, you've got to have the attitude that she has. And I would have, if I were in her position, I was very surprised that the way she came at him was, "This can never happen again," instead of pressing her advantage and just saying, "Dude, come on. You saw how this went. Do you really think that you're the one for the job? Which one of us was able to get things done tonight? Come on." And just, I feel like if she had pushed that a bit in the moment, I think he would have capitulated a little bit. because I think he kind of sees it could either have gone that way, or his sort of feeling of humiliation about what went down with Meg could have spurred him to be more obstinate than otherwise. I don't know, which way he would have gone with it. But I would have tried, were I in her shoes, because I just feel like that was a very clear win for her. Let's see. Martin says, I think Colin has the most common sense aside from Guillermo, to be honest. Totally disagree. I mean, just the negging thing that he did, and he seemed to really think that was working and was effective. No, I don't see it. If Nadja were sent to woo Meg, that shit would have worked. Her and Guillermo are going to be the two that I would think would get the closest to success on that. But Colin, oh my God, no. He really thought it worked. He looked at the camera and said, see, my brain with this package, it really does the job. She didn't know what hit her. He genuinely interpreted this as success before he got kicked out. The man does not have a great grasp on what's happening around him sometimes. But anyway, I'm interested to see how this goes, because I sort of thought, I interpreted the scene where she rips this guy's heart out and everybody immediately cows. I was like, oh, okay, so she is going to be in charge from here on out. I thought that moment was meant to tell me that. So to then have the episode sort of wrap with this conversation with Nandor that's not actually finishing with that, like, what's the word I want? That's not the conclusion that they come to. I was very surprised. So I'm going to back up a little bit again, because I've been jumping on the two main subplots for this episode, and I wanted to talk about just the tour that they get through the whole area that they are being led on by the what is her name? I feel like I asked this before, and we don't have a name for her. We just have a title, but she's Evil Mabel. I think we have established Vampire Mabel, and she's giving them what's very much like the orientation that you get when you start a job at a new place, and showing them the areas that they are allowed and not allowed, the ways that certain places are handled. She's talking about the abattoirs and is like, make sure that you like reserve them ahead of time because they get crazy busy. Over here, we have the break room. Make sure you label your snacks because we throw everything out every Friday. And there's a bunch of bodies just hanging in this like really grossly greenlit room. And this made me curious because in some vampire lore, they can't drink blood from a dead body. It's like not good for them. And for others, blood is blood and it doesn't matter, you know? I am going to assume that's the case for these guys because those bodies are very clearly dead. Like, you know, they've been gone. But I do love when she's like, you know, make sure to label them because we throw everything out every Friday. That shit was genuinely making me laugh. And then she says, behind this door is the Chamber of Curiosities. The treasures of many generations of vampires from around the world are collected here. Ageless, timeless, marvelous artifacts. But be warned, some of this stuff is very powerful and not to be monkeyed around with. And fucking Colin over here on the side is immediately like picking shit up. And Guillermo gets handed something. And it turns out it's Van Helsing's dick. And this was of interest to me because I know they are aware of what Guillermo can do, but I didn't remember that he told them he was a descendant of Van Helsing specifically. And it might be that I just forgot it, or it might have been sort of mentioned as having happened off screen. But the fact that Nandor calls him his like great grandfather, I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that was just something we all knew now. And there's this very weird door off to the side that has like a little sort of viewing hole in it that Colin unwisely opens. And she says, behind this door is the living quarters of the sire. And Nadja freaks out and says, the actual sire? And it turns out he is the oldest vampire in the world, and the vampire from which all others have descended, which I think is pretty fascinating in terms of what it might mean overall. This is the sort of thing that I understand, narratively speaking, why this is necessary with certain types of stories, but I also get a little bit salty about it sometimes. In a lot of stories where there is like a large population of some kind of monster, whether it be an alien or dragons or, you know, something like this with vampires, there will be a sort of like mechanism in the lore by which you kill the oldest one and all of the younger ones die as well. And again, I understand the necessity of it, because just fighting a huge group forever when you might just have a scrappy band of 5 people isn't necessarily real, like, interesting to read about or necessarily realistic. And you need them to be able to accomplish this major feat all on their own. So I get why it's done the way it's done in a lot of properties, but I do feel like sometimes it's kind of lazy, and I don't like there being such a huge weak spot in a group that is otherwise so powerful. To have that kind of like acute Achilles heel is just too easy. And I'm wondering with the sire, I don't think that killing him is going to kill all other vampires in the world. I just feel like that's not how anything would work in this lore with this show. But the introduction of him as a concept feels like it's meaningful here. And I do not know what could happen with him, what they, you know, like, because the episode ends, there's like a sort of, I don't know if you would say post credits, because it's not quite, it's like mid credits, I guess, scene of him apparently breaking through the doors of this, like, the doors of this door. Breaking through this door is what it seems like is happening. And I couldn't tell if it was being implied that Colin fucking around and opening the little door made it possible for him to get out, if it was supposed to be, you know, like the interference of these completely incompetent vampires that caused his escape. But I'm really curious what the sire is like, because the sounds that we're hearing are animalistic, and they are like, the Baron was the other oldest vampire we've ever encountered. And the Baron had a really weird sort of otherness to him. He really felt not human, but he was still speaking, you know, in a language we understood, and had not lost his faculties, basically, despite his extreme age. So I am really interested in the sire and what his deal is, and how much he is able to understand of his current position and how he's being treated. Just, is the growling that we're hearing his only means of communication, or is that just him being frustrated at being locked up? And like, why exactly is he locked up in the way he is? How is he fed? How all of this, you know, like, how does all of this work? So that's my question about one part of this. And, you know, also the relevance to like Guillermo with everything. I am worried about his involvement with this whole thing. But to speak of Guillermo, I have to also mention the familiar's room, which he gets locked into, and he escapes from pretty quickly and easily by climbing up the, what do you call it? The box spring of the bed and into the vent. But I had sort of wondered if he was going to be accepted from being kept here, because Guillermo tries to say he can't be put there. He's not actually a familiar. He's our bodyguard. He's our bodyguard. To which she says, well, we don't let humans just wander around in here. That's not happening. So unless you decide to make him a vampire. And everybody chimes in saying absolutely not. So Nandor tells him to go in there and doesn't really put up any further fuss. And I was kind of surprised at the fact that Guillermo doesn't express more irritation about that. He just goes with it. I shouldn't have been surprised. Guillermo chooses really weird times to express his irritation. And he has to be pushed pretty hard. It seems like every time something changes in a small way, he takes that as like a good sign and stops demanding to be treated better in other areas. So like the fact that he got made into their bodyguard instead of being a familiar anymore has seemed to satisfy him for the moment, and he is going to be more patient about everything, which is the wrong move. Like this is something that I think you could just see in relationships in general. You have a big blowout. Somebody says all the right things and the other person really believes this means there's going to be an actual change. And another, several months of being mistreated happens, and then they have another blow up, same thing over and over. And that really does seem to be how it's working. So every time Guillermo kind of starts to get more aggressive about being treated well and taken seriously, I think he's really turning a corner. And it seems like that's not actually what's happening. It seems like he is turning the same corner over and over and over again. So yeah, he gets locked in there and he escapes pretty quickly. And we had this scene that he winds up dropping in on where Laszlo is super excited because the Vampiric Council holds the world's oldest and largest collection of pornography. The Nobnomicon. Every chap and chapess. Everything you would need to know about fellatio. Gutenberg's Vaginaria. That's an original. There's just so much of this that is so goofy. I keep thinking by the time we're done with any segment with Laszlo, that we have finished with the overall sex jokes. And every time I'm wondering why the hell I thought that. Because it's endless. And the number of dick and pussy jokes that he can come up with, it's just truly unlimited. And it's very hit or miss for me, whether or not I think they're actually funny. I like a good dick joke. Don't get me wrong. And I make them plenty of times. But this it's almost doesn't even quite qualify as a joke a lot of the time, So this was another one of those segments where I was just like, all right, can we just keep this rolling here and get this over with? Because I know what we're doing now. We've started this with oldest collection of pornography. Okay, now there's going to be a running montage of a bunch of stuff from there it is. And this was the only one that I genuinely was like, I am really bored by these jokes at this point. They need to do something to jazz it up if they're going to keep going back to this well, because it's very predictable by now. The other thing, though, that I did like this episode was Colin encountering another energy vampire and talking to him, wondering where they come from, because that's part of what he's excited about having access to this library, is looking into his own history. And when he asks this guy, do you know where we come from? The dude thinks that maybe Colin is trying to drain him. And when asked what his methodology is, he says something about how he talks about like the differences between CBD and THC and like different strains and everything, which genuinely, if you have met a person who like goes hard with that kind of info, it is so boring and just not like, and also mentions that he got a drone and people hate it and how excited he is about that. So anyway, so those are like kind of like the two other little subplots that are happening here. Also, Colin accompanies Nandor and Nadja on their mission and is going to try and take notes. And he is very bad at this job and just really shouldn't be here, to be perfectly honest. But you get the feeling that he wants to come along for the opportunity to like drain, and encountering another energy vampire was just sort of a nice plus for him that he wasn't expecting. So it hits and misses this episode. It brings up some interesting questions. I don't know what we're going to get answered and what's going to be sort of left, as nothing. But I'm going to just say that I'm on Team Nadja for this position, and I think she should get promoted to the full ruler here. And I'll make her some campaign pins. I'll do it. So, all right, I'm going to wrap up. But thank you guys again for listening. Thank you to Max for commissioning this. Appreciate you a lot. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.